Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm going to narrate 8 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian Mountains. We'll cover a surveyor whose trail camera vanished without a trace, and a cartographer who discovered a hidden valley that doesn't show up on any official topographic data. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, share this with your friends, and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks. Now let's get into it. I work as a seagrapher. This job sent me into the southern Appalachian deep in eastern Kentucky. The assignment was a solo one, clean up some mapping errors where satellite data didn't match the old topographic charts. Nothing crazy, the kind of thing that comes up every now and then. Some elevation lines out of whack, a stream bed that supposedly dried up 50 years ago, but somehow still shows moisture activity on newer scans. 3-day field trip walk, in, mark it up, walk out. I've done way worse. I parked my truck at the end of a Forest Service road, well, what used to be a road, it turned to cracked shale halfway through, the kind of surface that sounds like you're driving over a pile of broken dishes. No way. I was pushing it further. I locked the doors, triple-checked my gear, marked my starting point on both GPS units, and eyeballed the paper map out of habit. The trailhead wasn't marked, just a fading impression. In the brush probably used decades ago, no footprints, no tire marks, nothing. Honestly, that's exactly what I look for. Undisturbed spots tend to tell better stories. The first stretch was decent rolling hills, some tight brush, but nothing I had to hack through. I had a good time. After about 4 miles, the terrain shifted steeper, climbs more uneven footing. I passed an old hunting stand half-eaten by moss, and later found a crumbled chimney sticking out of a slope. It looked like it used to belong to a settler's cabin. I marked it just for curiosity's sake. My planned campsite was near an old fire lookout tower I'd seen on the LAR images. It was marked on none of the newer maps, but the base structure looked like it was still standing when I finally reached it. The lookout wasn't much more than bones for corroded steel legs sunk deep into the ridge. The platform was mostly collapsed, only a few slats of metal hanging up top. The stairs were long gone. It didn't matter, I wasn't climbing it. I pitched my tent about 20 yards downhill, just under a dense thicket of mountain laurel, where the ground was dry and level logged. My coordinates: boiled some rice. Added jerky basic camp food. I turned in early, full and tired. Then, just before 12:40 I woke up. No sound, no movement, just open eyes, instantly alert, that kind of waking that doesn't feel like it came from inside you. I stayed still, tried to figure out what was different. Then I heard it a crack, like something heavy stepped on a dry stick, maybe 30 or 40 feet to my right. I've spent enough nights in the woods to know what a squirrel sounds like. This wasn't that. This was heavier, bigger. I waited a few seconds later. Another step, different spot, maybe closer. Same kind of crack. I slowly reached toward the tent pocket for my knife, my flashlight too. I didn't turn it on, I didn't breathe hard, just waited. Holding both the steps, continued slow, deliberate. A single crack, then silence, then another. Each time in a new spot, like something circling. The pacing was all wrong for a deer. Not curious, not anxious, just watching. Then nothing, total quiet. I stayed frozen for hours, couldn't even make myself blink. Sometimes I didn't hear anything else before dawn. When the sun finally came up, I crawled out of the tent and looked around. Nothing had been disturbed, no snapped branches, no trampled ground. But about 10 ft from my tent, right on the trail I'd hiked in on, someone or something had built a small stack of stones. 4 flat rocks, balanced perfectly, each one slightly smaller than the one below, like a weird trail marker. But it hadn't been there yesterday, I would have noticed. Guaranteed I didn't touch it. I snapped a few photos, logged the GPS point, then packed up and pushed on. My assignment wasn't finished. It took 3 more hours of climbing to reach the top of the ridge. That's when I found it, a stone shelf spread out in front of me, maybe 50 yards across, and then nothing. No continuation, just a sheer drop into a hidden valley in this valley. This is where everything stopped making sense. It wasn't on any map, not digital, not historic, nothing. The LAR scan had shown an empty elevation contour, like a big blank hole in the topography. I had assumed it was a scanning error. But no, it was real, a full basin hidden completely by surrounding ridges, maybe half a mile wide, trees undergrowth, rocks, normal at first glance. But none of it should have been there. It had literally never been recorded. I descended slowly, noting everything. As I got closer to the center, I saw it a circular formation, maybe 15 ft across, made entirely of flat river stones, no mortar, no bindings, just stacked rock, maybe 3 feet high, forming a clean, tight ring inside the ring. The ground dropped a shallow depression, perfectly circular, about a foot deep. Nothing growing in it. No moss, no grass, just compacted dirt, like it had been stepped on 1,000 times. I didn't step in, didn't touch the ring, didn't want to. I just walked around it, took photos, marked coordinates. Then I left fast. When I got back to my camp, things got worse. My tent had been moved, not torn apart, not searched, just moved about 2 ft to the left of where I'd pitched it. The gear inside untouched, everything exactly how I'd packed it, but the stakes were gone. And there were no drag marks, no scuffs. Someone had picked it up, carried it over, and set it back down like it was nothing. I stood there for a while, just staring at it. Then I noticed the second stone stack. It was closer to the base of the fire lookout. 6 stones this time. Taller, thinner, more carefully arranged, balanced, like it was done with tools or measuring instruments. I didn't take a picture of that one. I just packed up and left the trail back down. Was the same, but I moved quicker. I wanted out. I wanted to be back in the truck, driving on real pavement. That's when I heard it. Whistling. Note a high flat lasted about 5 seconds, then silence. Then it repeated, always the same length, always the same pitch. I stopped and turned, nothing. I picked up the pace. The whistling stayed behind me. Same distance, like it was matching my speed every 15 seconds, like a clock. I started walking faster. It sped up with me by mile 3. I was running. The pack bounced hard against my back. My knee twinged, but I didn't. Stop? I couldn't. I kept my head down until I hit a narrow switchback and had to slow to a careful crawl. That's when I saw a light ahead. Not mine, a dim yellow flicker, like firelight just around the bend, out of sight. It pulsed slowly in and out. I switched off my headlamp and crouched in the brush. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker like it was being carried. It just glowed. And behind me, the whistling started again. Closer this time, I broke from the trail and sprinted into the trees. I didn't care what I hit. I just pushed through branches, slid down the hill, tripped twice hard, and barely managed to stay upright. The third time, I didn't stop until I hit flat ground and saw the shimmer of my truck's windshield through the trees. It was still there, but someone had left something on it. Another stack of stones, 7 this time, tighter, cleaner, balanced like a sculpture right in the center of the hood. I didn't pause. I unlocked the door, shoved my gear in the back, jumped in. Then I noticed the paper. On the passenger seat, tucked into the crease, one torn page from a lined notebook. Not mine, just sitting there, no writing, just a charcoal sketch, circles within circles in the middle, a stick figure with no eyes, no face. I didn't think. I just started the engine and drove. 2 hours later, I was at a ranger station, small, tucked off the main road. I asked the guy behind the desk, who had jurisdiction over that part of the forest. He pulled up the map, gave me this casual shrug and said, "Technically federal, but no one really checks that section anymore. Not much to see, terrain's unstable." I didn't file a report, didn't show the photos. I deleted the GPS tracks, wiped my camera that valley. It still doesn't show up on any map. My name's Drew. Basically, I map forgotten paths, old mining roads, logging cuts, CCC trails that got scrubbed off official maps decades ago. It's a niche gig, but there's a demand for it, especially with forest management and conservation groups trying to keep records current. I work solo, always have. It's just easier that way. Most people can't handle being 30 MLR from the nearest cell tower, completely off-grid with only your own breathing. For company, this job came through a forestry group based in western North Carolina. They were trying to update their trail data for a patch of national forest land tucked up near the Tennessee border. It was north of a little town called Ridgeway, not exactly a tourist hotspot. The only trail references they had were these ancient topographic sheets from the 950s, hand-drawn and mostly useless. They told me they needed a full sweep of the area, see what paths were still there, which ones were usable, which had eroded or been swallowed by forest. I was supposed to log all that, track elevation changes, identify any landmarks still standing, and redraw a digital map from scratch. I planned a loop wide enough to cover the area, but tight enough to finish in 3 days. If I kept a decent pace, I drove out early on a Tuesday morning, parked my truck at the end of a gravel fire road, and loaded up. I brought 4 days of food, 2 gas cans for safety, my GPS solar charger, 2 compasses, and a backup map. I always overpack, but once you're out there, you're on your own. Day 1 went. Fine hot. But nothing weird. The trail came and went. Some stretches were easy to follow. Others were a mess. Overgrown, washed out, completely erased in spots. I found the usual leftovers. Rusted out. Barrels, bits of mining equipment, embedded in tree roots, fence posts, snapped in half and swallowed by brush. There was even a half-collapsed wagon with a sapling growing straight through the axle. That one stopped me for a second. It looked like the woods had just absorbed it. Without hesitation, I set up camp by a shallow stream. It was peaceful, nothing special. I boiled water, made freeze-dried lasagna, and read through some old survey notes by headlamp. The forest was noisy, frogs, insects, the occasional distant thump like a deer moving through. I didn't think twice about it. I've heard weirder sounds, slept without earplugs, just in case. Next morning I packed up and followed a dry creek bed that wasn't on any of the maps, paper or digital. It curved off to the right, and dipped sharply. The bed itself was strange, really wide and deeply gouged, like something had been dragged through it, but not in a straight line. It was almost like whatever made it had thrashed side to side. I checked for prints, nothing. No tire marks, no boot tracks, just that odd smearing pattern in the packed soil around noon. I hit a slope with the remains of an old chimney sticking up like a tooth. No house left, just the chimney. Its stone base still half intact. I poked around a little inside the footprint of what used to be a cabin. There were scraps of rusted iron, some shards of what looked like enamel-coated cookware, and this part stuck with me. An iron rod jammed into the ash and leaves at the base of the chimney. It was maybe 2 ft long, heavier than it looked, and had 2 prongs at the end, one twisted into a tight spiral, the other into a jagged fork. They weren't shaped like anything I could recognize, not letters, not tools, just symbols. I guess the tips were scorched, like it had been held in a fire. I'd pack it. Something about it just felt off. I took a few photos, leaned it against the chimney, and kept moving. That evening I set up camp on a ridge. High ground, good visibility. I made dinner, logged the day's notes, and wrote down some thoughts about a broken footbridge I'd crossed, but it was quiet. Too quiet. No insects, no. Rustling, even the sound of the fire felt dampened, like it was being swallowed by the trees. I kept looking up from my notebook expecting something, but nothing happened. I tried reading again, but gave up after a few pages. I lay down around 10:00 and turned off the headlamp. Sometime after midnight I woke up. At first I couldn't place why. Then I heard it, something brushing against the outside of my tent. Not like an animal rooting around. The sound was too smooth, too controlled. It moved slowly, deliberately, just this steady dragging sound like fingers trailing along the nylon wall. I stayed still. The knife was under my sleeping pad and I didn't reach for it right away. I just listened. Then there were 3 taps, soft, precise, right above my head. I eased my hand toward the knife, flicked the safety off my flashlight, and unzipped the sleeping bag just enough to sit up. My heart was pounding. I counted to 5, then yanked the tent flap open and hit the light. Nothing. No eyes shine, no crunch of footsteps, Running away, just a dead ridge and a tunnel of trees lit up in the beam of my flashlight. I stayed up the rest of the night sitting cross-legged with the knife in my lap, staring out at the dark. At sunrise, I broke camp fast. I checked my map for a shortcut. There was one that cut across the slope of a nearby mountain. It would be harder to rain, but it would get me back to the truck before dark. I went for it. It was rough going. The shortcut was basically a suggestion, more than a path: loose rock, steep grades, branches clawing at my sleeves. I pushed through a thicket and found myself looking down at the ground, confused footprints, barefoot. Dozens of them, all different sizes. Some big, adult-sized, others tiny, no shoe treads, no socks. Just clean human footprints pressed into the moss and soil. Some were fresh, the edges sharp. Others had been there long enough to fade. They weren't heading in one direction either. Some led uphill, some down. I crouched and just stared for what must have been a full minute. Then I stood and called out, "Hello, anyone out here?" Nothing, no echo, just trees. I moved faster after that. By mid-afternoon, my GPS started glitching. The screen flickered, coordinates froze, then reset to random points, sometimes miles from where I actually was. I tried restarting it twice. No luck. I ended up navigating by compass and sun position back to basics. And then I walked into a hollow that wasn't on the map. The slope into it was shallow. I barely noticed I'd gone down until I was at the bottom, and right away I knew something was wrong. The sound was gone again, like it had been vacuumed out of the air. My steps didn't echo. Even my breathing felt smothered. In the middle of the hollow was a ring of stones, 12 of them evenly spaced in a perfect circle, and right in the center, resting neatly on the dirt, was the same iron rod I'd left leaning against the chimney. It was the same one, same twist, same scorch marks. It hadn't fallen. There someone placed it. I didn't go near it. I didn't even look. At it long, I turned around and started hiking out immediately. The compass needle spun twice before locking in again. I didn't stop for anything. Every few minutes, I glanced back, always expecting to see someone step out from behind the trees. I swear I could feel it, like something was right behind me, just out of view. Watching every step, I reached the final slope just as the sun dropped. I got back to the gravel road and near darkness. I stopped and turned around. One last time, there were 3 figures standing just inside the trees, not moving, not approaching, just there, tall, barefoot faces blurred by shadow. Too far to make out clearly, but I knew they were watching. I didn't pack up camp. I didn't grab my gear. I got in the truck and drove when I filed my final report. I kept it minimal, just enough to check the boxes. I haven't been back. About 3 years ago, I was assigned to a solo seasonal post-tracking blackberry activity in the Appalachian Mountains near the Virginia-Tennessee line. The contract spanned from spring to fall, requiring me to live alone in a remote part of the forest. The cabin was situated approximately 30 miles from the nearest paved road. They transported me and my equipment in a lifted truck that barely managed the rugged terrain. The cabin was a prefab structure, metal walls, a thin roof, a single room with a cot, a generator, and a propane heater. There was no cell service or Wi-Fi, just a shortwave radio for emergencies and Sunday check-ins. My responsibilities included setting up trail cameras, monitoring GPS collars, and logging wildlife movements. I was aware of the solitude the job entailed, and during the initial weeks, I spent my time hiking, tagging, and checking cameras. I encountered occasional bear or coyote tracks, numerous deer, and a few old hunting stands. There were no issues. The most unsettling aspect was the profound silence. No traffic, no voices, only birds, and the wind rustling through the trees one night around 200 a.m. I heard what I assumed was a deer circling the cabin. The footsteps were light, slow, and inconsistent. I remained in bed, expecting it to move on. Then came a dragging sound, something long and heavy, being pulled across the ground, scraping over dirt and stone, stopping directly outside my window. I stayed still, listening. There were no knocks or voices, just the dragging. It persisted for about 10 minutes before ceasing. The next morning, I inspected the area around the cabin. There were no tracks. The hard-packed dirt wasn't ideal for footprints, but I expected some evidence. I concluded it was likely an animal, perhaps a bear with an injury or carrying prey. I noted it in my log and continued with my work. However, the dragging sound returned over the next few nights. It never came close enough for me to see anything, always staying just out of sight. I began to have trouble sleeping through the night. In the third week, I went to check one of the trail cameras and found it missing. It wasn't damaged, just gone. The metal mount remained bolted to the tree, but the camera had been cleanly removed. There were no claw or teeth marks, as if someone had unscrewed it and taken it. I suspected poachers and reported the incident over the shortwave radio. There was no response, not even static. The radio was completely dead. I examined the wiring, batteries, and antenna. Everything appeared normal. It had functioned properly the previous night, but was now silent. I decided to leave the next morning to report everything in town at sunrise. I packed my gear and attempted to start the truck. It wouldn't turn over. The battery light illuminated briefly, then faded. There were no clicks or sputters, nothing. I opened the hood. Everything looked fine. No loose wires or visible damage. Then I crouched down to look underneath. That's when I saw it. 4 deep gouges across the gas tank, long, clean, and curved. They were too long for any animal. I knew. I ran my fingers over them. The metal was peeled back, as if claws had dragged. Through it, near the rear tires, I noticed prints in the dirt. They resembled human footprints, but were elongated, each foot nearly twice the length of mine. The gait was unusual. One foot landed flat, while the other dragged behind, suggesting a limp. The prints led back into the woods. I returned inside and locked the door, spending the day checking the windows and listening. That night there was no dragging sound or footsteps, just silence until 3:17 a.m. It began with breathing close, heavy, and wet just outside the front door. Then came a knock. 4 soft, slow taps. I sat in the dark, unmoving, clutching a wrench. I stared at the door until sunrise, when daylight filtered through the window. I opened the door. No one was there, no tracks. But on the porch lay a single dead bird, its neck twisted, both eyes missing. I packed my bag, strapped on my boots, and began walking. I wasn't going to wait for help. The ranger station was 15 miles east, and I knew the trail by heart. I hiked for 4 hours without stopping, turning at every sound. Around mile 8, I heard the dragging again, behind me in the trees. I didn't run, just increased my pace, careful not to trip, keeping my head low and eyes forward. Then I saw it. It was crouched behind a tree 20 yards back. Its skin was ash-cold with long black hair covering most of its face. It didn't stand, but crawled low and crooked, using its arms while its legs dragged behind as if broken. I could see the curve of its spine beneath the skin, too many vertebrae. Its shoulders jutted out unnaturally high. It stopped and lifted its head just enough to reveal its mouth. It smiled. Its teeth were long, narrow, and jagged, too many to fit naturally in a human jaw. Then it raised one hand and tapped it against the tree 4 times, slow, and even I ran. I didn't stop for water or look back. I ran until my legs gave out half a mile from the station, crawling the last 100 ft when the ranger found me. I couldn't speak. He brought me inside and gave me water. I told him my truck had broken down. I didn't mention the creature. Not yet. I needed to see if it had left any trace. We drove back to the cabin in his truck. My vehicle started without issue. The gouges were gone. The radio worked fine. All the gear I had left inside was untouched, but the bird was still on the porch. The ranger suggested it was probably a fox or a bobcat, and advised me to take a few days off to clear my head. I didn't argue. I left that afternoon and took a hotel room in town. I never returned to the cabin the following year. I transferred to a post out west. Desert wildlife, wide open spaces, no trees, no shadows. I never told the agency what truly happened. They wouldn't believe it. I'm a trail surveyor. Not the most glamorous job, but it suits me. I get paid to hike through national parks, check trail conditions, log signs of erosion, map out water sources, and occasionally install wildlife cameras for tracking. Most of my work is solo. I'm used to being alone in the woods for days at a time, and honestly, I usually prefer it. Last October, I got assigned a 3-day solo sweep through a lesser-used part of the Appalachian Mountains, just north of a little town called Elridge in Tennessee. It's not exactly a tourist hotspot. Rugged terrain, spotty signals, and some steep switchbacks keep most casual hikers away. But it has this reputation: beautiful ridge views, dense forest, and the remains of old homesteads from before. The land was designated a protected zone. I'd covered nearby areas before. But this stretch was new to me. I got the usual pre-hike rundown from the rangers: watch for loose rock, on the switchbacks, stay out of the buildings, don't trust the old wells. Pretty standard one ranger, though threw in a few weird warnings, said people had reported hearing strange things at night. Metal, snapping voices when no one was there. One guy even swore something had followed him along the tree for a whole mile. I just smiled, nodded, and chalked it up to too much coffee and too little sleep. I started early the first morning, parked at a gravel pull-off just past mile marker 12, threw on my pack, and headed in. It was routine. The trail markers were fading, and some of the footbridges looked like they'd give out with one more solid storm. The streams were running higher than usual, and a few crossings soaked my boots halfway up the ankles. I stopped, often jotted notes, snapped pictures. For the final report that afternoon, I reached the ruins of the old Marlin cabin, just piles of stone, and half a porch still clinging to life. I'd seen it in ranger files before, but standing there, it almost looked staged. The porch had buckled like a snapped spine, and the chimney leaned just enough to make you think it might fall. While you blinked, I pitched camp about a mile past it, off a small rise where the trail forked around a cluster of dead trees. Dinner was a protein bar and some lukewarm coffee from my thermos. I turned in early. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I figured the cold had driven the animals into deeper cover around 3:00 a.m. I woke up to this soft, steady thewing, not loud, just rhythmic, like something was being dropped into soft dirt over and over again. I sat up inside the tent, heart picking up pace. Listened, didn't hear anything else. I didn't unzip the flap, figured it was a deer or maybe a bear pawing around for scraps. But after a minute it stopped and everything went still. I stared at the nylon wall of the tent for what felt like forever. Then eventually laid back down, told myself it was the wind. The second day took me deeper into the trail loop toward a stretch that hadn't seen maintenance in years. It was rough, thick, overgrowth downed limbs, parts where the trail basically vanished beneath moss and root. I was moving slow, stopping to cut branches and refall sections. Late morning, I came across something odd. A fire ring still smoking, coals faintly glowing beneath the ash that set off. Alarms fires weren't allowed in that zone during dry season, and the last rain had been over a week ago. Next to it was a small liento pieced together from tree limbs and a moldy old tarp. It wasn't on any of my maps. I did a slow circle, called it in, on my radio. No response. Not unusual that far in, but not great. Either I flagged it with tape, took GPS, logged it, and moved on. A few hours later, I stopped to check a fallen log for insect activity and noticed something strange. 3 long, smooth scratches down one side. Each gouge was deep, too clean to be from another log scraping it. They were far too wide for a raccoon, too evenly spaced for a cat. No claw tips or secondary marks, just long, deliberate cuts. I took a photo and labeled it as possible, bear sign. But in my head, I knew it didn't look right that night. I made camp near a spring, one of those that trickles clear over an old rock wall. I filtered some water, cooked a freeze-dried meal, updated my logs around 10. I crawled into the tent. I wasn't particularly tired, just uneasy. There was this weird sound, not loud. more like a low mechanical hum. I sat up and listened hard. It didn't match anything natural, maybe distant machinery, except there was no service road for miles, no power lines either. Then, a few minutes after midnight, I heard leaves crunching, definite footsteps, not random rustling, not an animal, just steady, slow movement across dry ground. I froze, reached for my knife, pulled the zipper on the inner tent flap just a couple inches. At first I didn't see anything, then I caught movement, a figure tall, thin, moving between the trees like it didn't need to dodge branches or watch its footing. No flashlight, no pack, nothing. It stopped right where my fire had been earlier. The shape stood in the clearing, back lit faintly by moonlight. Its limbs looked too long. Its arms hung low, almost to the knees, and its head tilted like it was listening for something specific. I stayed completely still. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. My heart was going full sprint, but I kept the knife tight in my hand and just watched. Eventually it turned and vanished into the trees, didn't run. Just disappeared like it sank into the dark. I didn't sleep. I sat up, the rest of the night knife in my lap, flashlight ready, barely even blinking at first light. I broke down camp in under 5 minutes and backtrack, no breakfast, no coffee, just walking fast and watching the woods around me like they might close in, maybe an hour into the return hike. I passed another lean, too. This one, even older, collapsed on one side. I peeked in. Without stepping close inside, something had been arranged. Bones, not fresh, but cleaned, stacked in a tight spiral like someone had taken their time on the back wall. Scratched into the wood was the word. Still dozens of times the lower corner had fresher marks. The wood curled at the edges like it had been carved that very night. I didn't log it, didn't take GPS, just kept going, no brakes, no water. 3 hours later, I came up on the Marlin ruins again, and something had changed there, right? On the edge of the broken porch sat a small cloth doll, looked handmade, stuffed with old rags. Its face was blank, stitched with black thread, and its head was tilted slightly toward the trail, toward me. I kept moving, didn't even pause. No photos, no notes. When I saw my truck, I almost dropped to my knees. I didn't even pull my pack off, just threw it into the bed and drove windows down, eyes on the mirror the whole way back at the station. I dropped my report on the desk, gave them what I had: trail damage, erosion notes, the lean toes, the fire ring left out, the footsteps, the figure, the doll. One of the rangers, Mark, flipped through my pictures. He stopped at one from the second day, right before the spring. This was from the east side, right? He asked, yeah, just before I set camp. He turned the screen to me. In the corner of the frame, barely visible behind a tree trunk, was a pale shape. It wasn't light glare. It wasn't a leaf. It was a face round featureless watching. That was the last job I took in Tennessee. Since then, I've stuck to the Rockies, Utah, Oregon, Colorado, places with distance, with people. Nearby with open sky. I won't go back to those woods in Elridge. Not alone? Probably not ever. I'm 31, and I work as a mobile notary, basically. I drive to people's homes to help them sign legal documents, wills, loans, property transfers. It's not exciting, but the money's decent, and the flexibility is nice. Most of my gigs come through an app. I keep it running in the background, and when someone in my area needs a signature witnessed, I get a ping one. Thursday afternoon, I was home halfway through a sandwich when my phone buzzed. The job said, property title transfer, about an hour east of where I live, pretty deep into the hills. The payout almost double my usual rate, no extra explanation, but I didn't need one. I tapped accept before I even finished chewing. The address was listed as Sugar Hill Road, private lane. Access, no number, no mailbox, just GPS coordinates. That kind of vague listing isn't super unusual for backwoods properties. Some of those houses are practically hidden, especially the older ones. I figured I'd deal with it. When I got close, I tossed my notary kit in the front seat, grabbed a hoodie, and left. Right as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, the drive started out fine. 2-lane roads winding through hills, lots of long stretches where I didn't see another car. About 45 minutes in the pavement gave way to gravel. I slowed down windows, cracked a little, because my AC's been spotty lately. Then the GPS started glitching, froze for a second, then completely blanked. Lost signal too, not just bad service, full dead zone. No bars still. I had the last direction saved in memory, continue 2 miles, then turn at Sugar Hill. I crawled along until I spotted it. A wooden sign nailed to a tree, Sugar Hill Private. Underneath, someone had spray painted a big red X, subtle, real welcoming. But I'd come this far, the money was good, and honestly, I just wanted to get it over with. I turned onto the lane. Almost immediately, the road got worse, way worse. Deep tire ruts, patches of mud, big roots sticking out. I had to swerve around one that looked like it could take out my suspension trees arched overhead, the branches low and tangled. It felt like I was driving into a tunnel. Eventually I saw the cabin. It was bigger than I expected, 2 stories, I think. But old, really old. The kind of place where everything's faded and leaning, just a little, like time's been pushing on it for years. No car in the driveway, no lights on, no movement, just this stillness. I parked about 10 FT from the porch and sat there for a second, hand on the door handle, trying to decide if I should honk or just go up and knock. Right as I leaned toward the horn, the front door creaked open. Nobody came out, but I heard a voice, a woman's, "You the notary?" It startled me enough that I jumped in my seat. I called out, "Yeah, I am," grabbed my kit and stepped out. She didn't come to meet me, just waited inside out of sight. The screen door hung half open. When I stepped into the cabin, it smelled like old wood and something else, something musty inside. Everything looked frozen in time. Floral wallpaper faded from smoke or age. A couple of old rugs worn down to the threads. There was a wood stove in the corner with ash scattered in a little pile next to it, like someone had dumped it out and never cleaned it up. Then she appeared mid-50s, maybe a bit older, hair pulled back under a kachchief long skirt that brushed the floor. Her face was lined, but her expression was polite. I guess only her smile didn't match her eyes. Her eyes were hard or flat. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but something about them made me keep my voice lower than usual. She motioned to the table, got the papers all ready. It's the deed my brother passed, and now it's all mine. I walked over. The folder was thick, neatly organized signatures, notary section, witness line, even a checklist, like the kind title companies send, looked real. I took her ID and got to work, just focusing on the process. That part always calms me down. Forms, stamps, signatures. It's a rhythm. I know she didn't talk much after that, just stood there watching me, didn't sit, didn't move. As I finished up packing my seal and journal away, she said, "There's one more I need signed for my daughter. She's not well enough to come downstairs." That gave me pause. I asked more out of habit than anything if her daughter was mentally competent and understood what she'd be signing. She's quiet, but she understands. The woman said quickly, already turning toward the stairs. I hesitated. Technically, I was supposed to make sure the signer could willingly sign and understood what they were signing, but the paperwork so far had been clean, the payout was solid, and something in her tone made it feel like arguing wouldn't go well. I followed her. The upstairs smelled different. Not like downstairs, it was heavier damp, like wet laundry that had been left too long in the machine. The hall was narrow-lined with old family portraits that were too dark to make out. In the dim light, at the very end, there was a room with the door open and a yellowish ball burning inside. She stepped aside. I walked in. There was a bed pushed up against the wall, covered in layers, quilts, old fur throws, maybe even blankets made of animal hide on the bed. Sat a girl, maybe late teens, though it was hard to tell. She was small. Still, her back was to me. She was facing the corner, head tilted down. "She don't talk much," the woman whispered behind me. Again the girl didn't react. No nod, no flinch. I checked the paper, just a statement of boundary confirmation for some land they apparently shared. No issues legally, at least. Not on the surface. I asked the girl her name. Silence. The woman answered for her softly, then gently took her daughter's hand and put a pen in it, guided it to the paper the girl signed, but the way she moved it was off. Like she wasn't used to using her hands, the pen dragged in slow, deliberate lines. And the second the pen left the paper, the air shifted. I felt it. My ears popped. It was like something pushed down on the whole room. It wasn't nerves, it was physical. I was done. I needed to leave. As I turned to go, I heard movement behind me. The girl had turned her head just enough for me to see her face. Her lips were stitched shut. Crude black thread pulled through them in big, uneven X's. Some of the skin was puckered like it had been done days ago, or maybe longer. My whole body just went cold. I looked at the woman. She didn't react, didn't look guilty, didn't seem surprised, just gave me a faint smile and said, "We appreciate your help." I didn't say another word, just backed out of the room, trying not to move too fast. She followed me down footsteps light behind mine. I didn't ask questions, I didn't make accusations. I just kept walking step by step toward the front door. And then, just as I grabbed the handle, I heard something, a scream from upstairs. Not a normal scream, this wet, ragged, muffled howl, like someone was trying to force sound through torn vocal cords, gurgling. I turned, couldn't help it. The woman had stopped in the middle of the living room. Her arms were loose at her sides. She was staring at the floorboards like she was waiting for something underneath them to move. I bolted, ran straight to my car, threw the kid into the seat without even closing the door, and started the engine. As I reversed headlights, caught something figures coming out of the trees behind the cabin, barefoot, quiet, their heads wrapped in cloth, like pillowcases tied tight around their necks, couldn't see faces, just outlines. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They just walked forward. I didn't look back after that. My GPS was still dead. But I remembered the turns made it back to the highway, and as soon as I had signal, I pulled over and called the number listed as the document's originating contact. A man answered. I asked if he or his family had recently signed anything regarding property on Sugar Hill Road. He said no, sounded confused, said his sister had died years ago, 4 to be exact. I reported the incident to the app support team. They said they'd escalate it, sent me a ticket. Then nothing. The job disappeared from my history. So did the payment, like it never happened. I'm a forestry tech, not a park ranger. People mix that up all the time. I don't carry a weapon, and I'm not trained for emergencies. I spend my time walking through dense woods with measuring tape, soil kits, and data sheets. I record tree growth, take samples, look for signs of wildlife scat tracks, markings on bark. Usually I've got a compass dangling from my neck and my GPS, unit clunking on my belt. That thing looks like it was built in the 90s, and probably was last summer. I was assigned to a solo job out near the West Virginia-Kentucky line, an isolated spot in the Appalachian Range, about 10 miles from the nearest paved road. The maps call it Gable's Spine. Locals have a different name for it. God's Elbow. I thought it was a joke at first, some weird Appalachian humor, but the way they said it, like they were talking about a place you don't joke about, like it was tied to something old. A woman at the gas station actually lowered her voice when she said it. Then she told me not to camp near any rock piles, which didn't help. It was a 3-ite deployment, pretty standard wildlife monitoring, mostly tracking black bear movement, possibly some coyote activity. I've done worse. The agency gave me a folded paper map that looked older than I am, a hand radio with spotty range, and a tent kit. No cell service, that far out. Of course, that's normal. I drove out early Tuesday morning and left the truck at a locked service gate, then hiked in. Even calling it a trail was generous, more like a faded scar in the trees, overgrown, choked with underbrush and webs. I had to stop every 5 minutes to clear my face with a stick. I'd brought a machete, thankfully. After about 4 miles of dragging myself through branches and briars, I reached the spot I'd picked out on the satellite overlay, a shallow depression in the terrain, maybe 40 or 50 FT across. There was decent visibility all around. That's what you want when you're alone. Room to see things coming. I set up camp dead center, checked in. Over the radio signal was weak but functional, dropped a pin with the GPS, then headed out to set trail cams in a 5-point pattern. I like that setup. Lets me track movement from multiple angles. The day passed without anything unusual. Lots of walking trees, old stumps, squirrel chatter. I noted a few claw marks on a beech trunk bear, probably a juvenile. The weird thing was how quiet the forest got. The farther I went, like something had pressed mute on the woods. No birds, no insects, just that soft crunch of my boots on old leaves. I made it back to the clearing around dusk, ate one of those miserable ration packs, and sat on a log, waiting for the dark. I remember how weirdly thick the air felt. Not heavy like humidity, just still like the forest was holding its breath. I zipped up in the tent by 11 Sur and knocked out fast. Those long hikes always do me in sometime in the middle of the night. I shot awake. I couldn't tell if I'd heard something or dreamed it. My ears were ringing with silence, which happens sometimes when you're out that far. But then it came again, a scream, not a human scream, higher pitched sharp. It cut off mid-note, like someone hit pause. My first thought was a fox, because they make some creepy noises at night. But foxes usually have a sort of yipping taper to their cries. This was clip 2, exact. Then again, same pitch, same length, same direction, 3 in total, evenly spaced. I unzipped the flap just enough to stick my head out. The forest was dark, no wind, no leaves rustling, no eyes shine. Then 5 sharp clicks, like wood knocking against wood, clean spaced out, almost rehearsed. I froze. I've heard of woodpeckers before. This wasn't that these were deliberate measured. I stayed still for what felt like forever. My fingers went numb from holding the tent flap open. Eventually I backed inside and lay flat, eyes wide open, until the sun started bleeding through the nylon, when I finally unzipped the tent and crawled out. Everything looked the same. The forest was calm, normal. I kept telling myself it had to be animals, maybe some kind of branch snap, echoing. Weirdly, I tried to laugh it off but couldn't shake that feeling in my gut. I decided to check the area where the sound had come from. I hiked east, keeping an eye on the compass. About 300 wide in, I stepped into another small clearing and just stopped 3 deer legs. Just legs. No body severed clean, no ragged tearing, no fur clumps. No blood pool, each one angled with the hooves pointing toward the center of a triangle. They'd been arranged, not dumped placed. I checked the grass, no drag marks, nothing trampled. It didn't make sense. I bagged one of the legs for sample testing. It was cold to the touch, too cold for how warm the night had been. There weren't even flies buzzing around. I radioed it in. The ranger asked if I wanted backup sent out. I said no. I don't even know why. Stubbornness, pride. I told him I'd log it and recheck the site next day. That night, I sat outside the tent. I didn't even try to pretend I was going to sleep. I kept the flashlight off, but held it ready. Every so often I'd tap the radio just to make sure it hadn't died. Around 1:45 a.m. The click started again. 5 of them, same rhythm, same sound. Only this time they came from the edge of the clearing. I clicked on the flashlight and swept it toward the trees. That's when I saw it. Just for a second. A bare arm, ale too thin, no hair, no sleeve. It pulled back behind a tree like it realized I'd seen it. "Hey," I yelled, "who's out there?" No answer, and then the screams again, 3 of them, identical. Same spacing, same pitch, like someone hitting the same sound file over and over. I didn't sleep at all, just sat there with the flashlight trained on the trees and my back pressed to the tent. At first light, I packed everything left. The cams didn't even bother eating. I just needed to move. I hiked straight back to the truck, and when I got back to the station, I told my supervisor everything. No sugarcoating. He didn't laugh, didn't act surprised, just told me to take a few days off. He'd send a team out to retrieve the gear. But 2 days later, I showed up at dispatch anyway. I couldn't shake it. I needed to know what was on the cams. We hiked back in as a group. The site looked untouched. Nothing disturbed, but every camera had been turned just slightly, not knocked down or broken angled differently than how I'd set them, like someone had come through, and adjusted them carefully, back at base. We reviewed the footage. The first one, facing southwest, showed a large shape at the edge of the frame. Could have been a bear, but the way it moved, too upright, too smooth, too quiet. The second showed a hand, that same pale skin fingers too long, no sleeve, just hovering in front of the lens for maybe 10 seconds, then gone. The last cam, the one closest to where I'd found the deer legs, caught the sound. 5 clicks, clear as anything. Then silence. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. The agency flagged the zone as off-limits due to instability, but my supervisor later told me casually over coffee that I wasn't the first tech to report weirdness in that area. One guy 3 years ago said he heard something that copied animal sounds. Another swore. She saw a tall man moving through the woods who never blinked. They both made it out, but neither went back. They neither will I. This was a couple of years ago. I was sent to survey a region in southern West Virginia around a former mining town that had been shut down for decades. The job was simple on paper. Confirm the existence of an old trail that some old forestry maps mentioned but never fully documented. There were rumors, locals called it the drift or minor spite, stuff like that. But nothing official, just stories and vague references. Most of the people I talked to in the area shrugged it off, said it wasn't worth my time. One guy just muttered, "Nothing out there," but what wants to be left alone, and changed the subject. I figured it was probably just overgrown. Still, I drove out to the edge of the old town, what was left of it anyway. Just a few rusted signs and a row of collapsed buildings. The place felt completely cut off, like even time had forgotten about it. I parked on this dirt path where my map said the trail might start. Took me a while to even spot it. There was no real sign, just a slightly thinner patch in the trees where the brush didn't grow as thick. I loaded up my gear and headed in. It was quiet right away. Not peaceful. Quiet. Just no sound, no birds, no insects, nothing. It's always a little unsettling when the woods go silent like that. I tried not to dwell on it and kept walking. The trail was narrow, barely there, but walkable. Every few hundred feet I had to duck under branches or sidestep rotted logs a mile or so in. I noticed these rocks off to the side of the path, not just random scatter, stacked deliberately. Like someone had built a small cairn. I stopped, took a photo. It was odd but not unheard of. Hikers sometimes leave markers. I figured maybe someone else had tried to map this place before. I moved on. Half a mile later, I saw another one, taller, different arrangements, then another a little further in, and then more. Each one slightly more intricate than the last. They weren't just random. They formed a pattern like a breadcrumb trail pulling me deeper, and I followed it. Of course I did. I wasn't thinking about legends or ghost stories. I was thinking about my map, about documenting everything. Then I heard something. At first, I thought it was my radio. I always bring a small emergency one for contact, but it was off. I paused and heard it again. Soft whispering, just a few seconds. Then nothing like someone speaking behind me, but way too far away to make out. I turned, didn't see anything, and assumed it was wind. Or maybe just my brain playing tricks. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I kept walking. Eventually, the path opened up into a clearing, and sitting right in the middle of it was this old cabin. The thing looked like it. Hadn't been touched in 70 years. Roofs, sagging windows, broken vines climbing the sides, but it was still standing. There was something strange about how intact it looked, considering the state of everything else in that forest. I approached slowly. The door was shut, but not locked. I gave it a light push, and it swung open with that creaky old hinge sound that would have been funny if the place hadn't already made the hair on my arms. Stand up inside. Everything was still dust floating in the air. Furniture collapsed on itself, an old iron stove in one corner. It looked like someone had just up and left plates still on the table. A broken lantern by the door. There were papers scattered on the floor, too. Faded to read. It didn't feel abandoned so much as paused, like the place was holding its breath. Then the whispering started again, only now it was louder. I froze. I was standing just inside the door, barely 2 steps in. The whispering was all around me, coming from the walls, from under the floorboards, and I know how that sounds. I do. But it wasn't the wind, and it wasn't animals. It was voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once in a language or tone I couldn't place. Not yelling, just this steady, malicious murmur. The air dropped a few degrees. I felt it in my teeth. It turned to leave. But the second I moved, the door slammed behind me so hard the entire cabin shuddered. I lunged for it, grabbed the handle, pulled nothing. It wouldn't open. It felt jammed or held. I don't know. I yanked harder, bracing my foot against the frame, but it stayed shut. The whispering kept going louder now, angry. There was pressure building in the room, like the sound was trying to push me out of my own skin. My chest was tight. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. Then silence, like a switch, flipped, and slowly the door creaked open on its own. I didn't hesitate. I didn't try to figure it out. I just ran full sprint. I didn't care what I hit. Didn't care what direction I was heading. Just moved. The forest didn't feel the same. On the way out, the trees looked closer. The light felt different. I swear I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. I made it back to my car, barely keys shaking in my hand. I unlocked it, jumped in, and peeled out, like something was chasing me. Didn't stop until I hit the highway. I never told the agency the full story, just said the trail was too damaged and overgrown to map safely. That part wasn't even a lie. They crossed it off the project list. I never had to go back. I work for private outfits, timber companies, mineral rights. Guys, sometimes developers, looking to build on untouched land. It's not an office gig. My job happens deep in the bush, often in places no one set foot in for decades, sometimes longer. I hike in, I camp out, I map everything. The slope of the terrain, the flow of water, soil composition, elevations, rock formations. I basically help companies figure out how to use land they haven't even seen yet. And honestly, I like it that way. I like being out where, no. One is alone, focused, no distractions. The quiet gets into your head. But I've always been comfortable with that. Anyway, this job came in last summer. Timber company wanted to move into a new stretch along the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Deep in the Appalachian range, the land was about as remote as it gets, no real roads, no cell signal, no towns for miles. They'd sectioned it off, and I got assigned one of the bigger quadrants. I was told I'd need to spend at least 3 days on-site foot access, only. That didn't bother me. I've done longer trips. I've been dropped by helicopter before and told to find a trail out. So I said, sure, packed up my gear and got ready. But I'll say this, even from the prep stage, this job felt off. Not in any dramatic way. Just a weird tension in my gut. Like the land itself wasn't interested in being cataloged. I loaded my pack with the essentials: satellite GPS, solar panel, charger. 2 radios, emergency beacon, laminated topographic maps, compass, food, water, small stove fire starting kit. My tent sidearm and some backup batteries, light, but functional. Always pack, like your ride's not coming back. My drop-off point was this overgrown logging path off a dirt road that already looked like no one had driven it since the 90s. The guy dropping me off was quiet, didn't chat much when I climbed out. He looked at the tree line, then at me, and just said, "See you a Friday. Try not to wander too far." That didn't help the feeling in my stomach. I watched the truck drive away, the taillights vanishing into dust. Then I turned toward the trees and started walking. At first night, I made camp by a little stream. Maybe 2 mi, and the woods were thick but manageable. Nothing I hadn't seen before. I boiled water, cooked some instant rice, checked my coordinates. Everything seemed routine until around 11. I had just zipped up the tent and was halfway through jotting notes in my log when I heard it movement on the far side of my tent, slow and heavy, like someone walking deliberately through dry leaves, too heavy to be a deer. Not the erratic scurry of a raccoon or the quick thumps of a bear. Whatever it was moved, like it didn't care if I heard it. I sat completely still, reached slowly for my flashlight, didn't turn it on, just held it and listened. It passed by maybe 10 or 15 feet away. Never broke into a run, Never stopped, just kept going when it was gone. I sat there for another hour, listening to nothing at dawn. I checked around my site. No tracks, no bent grass, not even a scuff in the dirt. The second day I started early, worked steadily north through steep ridgeal lines. The landscape was beautiful, in a raw, forgotten kind of way. Deep valleys, thick canopy, old rock outcroppings. My GPS gave me some trouble in the thicker parts, but nothing major. Around 3:00 in the afternoon I came across something strange. It wasn't marked on any of the maps. It was a circular stone structure, about 4T high, spiral-shaped, like someone had stacked fist-sized rocks in a perfect coil. Not a Chiron. Chirons looked different. This was too symmetrical, too deliberate. I stood there a while, just looking at it. I walked around it twice, took some photos, logged the coordinates. Then I kept moving. But I'll admit, I kept glancing back. That thing didn't look old. It looked preserved, maintained. Even that night, I didn't make camp until it was already getting dark. I'd pushed a little too far, trying to cover extra ground. As I was walking, I started noticing something strange. Whenever I stopped, I'd hear something else stop too. Always off to my right, always just far enough away that I couldn't see it. It didn't feel like an animal. I called out once, loud and clear, said, "Hello, anyone there?" Silence. I camped in a shallow ditch, didn't build a fire, didn't unpack more than I had. Sat up with my pistol across my lap, staring into the trees. I didn't sleep by day 3. I was ready to get out. I figured if I moved quick, I could finish the last section and get closer to the ranger station marked on my backup map. I decided to cut through a ravine. Bad idea. The place hadn't seen human feet in decades. Overgrown slick rocks, thick vines about halfway through. I saw something that stopped me cold. A tree split straight down the middle, like someone had taken a hatchet to it, clean and intentional inside the split. Both halves had carvings, not words, not pictures, symbols deeply etched. Clean lines, sharp edges. Some looked geometric, others were just shapes I couldn't place. I didn't document. It didn't even take a picture. I just stepped backward out of the ravine and looped a mile around it. That afternoon I crossed over a ridge expecting open ground. Instead I hit a clearing with something worse than the spiral stones, bones, dozens of them, little ones, birds, squirrels, maybe a fox or two. They were laid out in a long pattern across the grass. Some had been tied together with string and feathers. Some were stuck into the ground like stakes. There were no signs of weathering, no moss, no leaves. Someone had built that recently and they were keeping it clean. I stepped forward once, just once. The trees above me went dead silent, not a flutter, not a chirp. I backed away and kept walking. I didn't stop that night. I just kept heading south, hoping to hit that ranger station by sunrise around midnight. The woods changed. I couldn't explain it, but something shifted. The air felt thinner, like I'd climbed way higher than I had. My chest started tightening, like I couldn't get enough oxygen, and all the usual forest sounds. Crickets' leaves, frogs were gone, just me and the crunch of my boots and the sound of my own breath. Then I heard it, a scream behind me, far, but not far enough. It started low and human, but then it kept going, climbing in pitch and bending into something metallic and horrible. It sounded like a person being pulled apart, trying to yell for help through a throat full of broken glass. I ran. Branches tore at my arms. My pack thumped hard against my back. I didn't care where I was going, just away. I kept running until my legs stopped working, and I dropped near a fallen tree, gasping for air. I lay there, barely moving, for hours. I didn't hear the scream again, but I did hear footsteps closer this time. And, breathing just as the sky started to lighten, I found the ranger station looked like it had been swallowed up by the forest. Old wood vines creeping up the porch windows, nearly blacked out, but someone was sitting on the porch like they'd been there. All night the ranger stood up when he saw me. Didn't look surprised, didn't ask questions. He just looked me over and said, "You made it out late." I told him what I'd seen, the spiral, the tree, the bones. He didn't look shocked, just nodded slowly and said, "That stretch, we don't map that part anymore." That was all he said. The company paid me half of what they'd promised, never asked about the rest of the data. They assigned another guy, Harlan, to finish my quadrant. I checked the files later. He never checked in, never submitted coordinates, never uploaded a single note, and no one ever found his tent. I'm Nate, just an ordinary guy who loves hiking. I've been exploring trails for years, seeking out the less traveled paths where nature feels untouched. In the summer of 2022, I decided to venture into a section of the Appalachian Mountains in western North Carolina, right outside the boundaries of the Pisgah National Forest. I'd heard whispers about an old unofficial trail system locals referred to as Cinder Path. It wasn't on any public maps, had no markers, and hadn't been maintained in years. That kind of mystery was exactly what drew me in. I drove in through a winding forest road that ended at a dilapidated fire tower, abandoned, rusted through, with stairs missing halfway up. There was a small gravel pull-off, no signage, just a thick tree line in a natural break where a trail used to be. I parked, geared up, and set out around noon, eager to see what secrets the trail held. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail was faintly visible underfoot, compacted earth and patterns of wear that don't vanish even after a decade of neglect. I hiked about 6 miles that first day. Everything felt normal until maybe an hour before sunset. That's when I came across a ring of stones, waist-high wide as a dinner table. It wasn't a fire pit. There was no ash or burn marks. The stones were clean, too clean. No moss, no leaves, like someone had brushed them that morning. I paused, puzzled by the oddity, but eventually continued on. By 6. I set up camp in a flat area near a slope, 30 ft from a dry creek bed. The forest was eerily silent. No animals, no birds. Just the wind pushing through the canopy. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps. Not animals. Steady, bipedal. Slow, my heart pounded as I sat up in my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. At first I didn't see anything. Then I caught the shape of a man walking past the tree line, maybe 30 yards away. No flashlight, no gear, just walking. I held my breath, frozen in place. After 2 minutes, he disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I found bare footprints in the dirt near my camp. No shoe treads, just human prints, dozens of them. They came from every direction, but didn't lead anywhere, just loops and circles like someone pacing. A chill ran down my spine. I considered turning back, but decided to press on. I'd covered too little of the trail, and I didn't want to abandon the hike. I moved fast that day. Covering 10 miles, I passed 2 more stone rings, same size, same spotless stones, around mile 16. I stopped. There was something nailed to a tree. It looked like a piece of stretched leather, maybe from an animal, but it had human teeth embedded in it. 5 set in a curve. The gums were still attached. I took a photo, logged the location, and hiked until sundown. I didn't eat that night at 2 a.m. I heard the singing, not words, just humming, deep, slow, tuneless. At first it was far away. Then it came closer, not approaching, just louder, like the trees were carrying it. I lay there paralyzed until dawn. At first light, I broke camp and started hiking west, away from the last marked waypoint. I had no signal, but my GPS was still working. The trail became harder to follow, and the forest grew denser, thicker, trunks, tighter spaces, branches broke against my pack. Every 20 ft, I made it 6 miles before I found the cabin. It wasn't on the map. It was half sunken into a hill with a collapsed roof and rotting beams. But there were drag marks in the dirt leading to the door lines, where something heavy had been pulled inside recently. The door was slightly open. I didn't go in. Instead, I circled around the cabin and found a small shed 20 ft behind it. I looked through a crack in the planks inside. I saw stacks of bones, small ones, mostly some strung up like wind chimes. One set had sneakers next to it, toddler-sized. I ran. I don't remember the next few miles. I just followed the slope downward, trusting gravity more than my map. Around noon, I reached a ravine and tried to radio out, still nothing, so I kept going around 4-0P. I found an old fence line, wooden posts, barbed wire strung low. I followed it until it met a creek, and just beyond that I saw smoke. Real smoke. A campfire. It belonged to a guy named Doyle. Mid-50s, lived in a hunting shack. When I stumbled out of the trees, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Said nobody came out of that part of the woods, not anymore. He let me use his landline. I called the ranger station and gave them coordinates. They told me to stay put when I tried to sleep that night in Doyle's shack. I couldn't. I asked him why the trail had been abandoned. He just stared at the floor for a long time and said people started vanishing in threes. Mostly, then the search parties started coming back. Sick the next morning, I was airlifted out. Official report said the trail was environmentally unstable. No further exploration was scheduled. I asked about the cabin, the shed, the bones. They told me no structures have been recorded in that zone. I don't know what lies out there. I just know something watches. That old path keeps it clean, hums in the trees and walks in circles around strangers' tents. I've hiked dozens of trails since then. I've camped in snow, hiked through lightning storms, been caught in landslides, but I won't go near the Appalachians again.